We get into our interactive segment on environmental concerns. This as Kenya is set to host the Africa Climate Summit next week. On set, we have the director of CRISAT Africa program, REBBIE, HARAWA, to give us more insight into environmental concerns as we set to host this event next week. Welcome on set. There has been a lot of concerns in regards to environmental matters, and we are happy as a country we are hosting this event this year. But then before we get into that, what is CRISAT and what role is it playing in this summit?
CRISAT, we are the International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics. We have a commitment to transform agriculture, food systems, and livelihoods in arid and semi-arid areas, which in Kenya, if you look at the ASALs, it's actually 89% of the land. And as a CRISAT, we are committed to develop crop varieties that are adaptable to these dryland areas, more adaptable to climate change. We are talking of cereals like sorghum, millets, grain legumes like pigeon peas, groundnuts that are nutrient dense. We are very committed also to develop technologies that are preserving the water as well as the soils in these dryland agroecologies, most of which are actually degraded. We have another commitment of making sure that these technologies, when we develop with our partners, they actually reach the hands of the smallholder farmers. So we work around the research for taking these technologies through various studies, markets. We have our work that spans from Asia all the way here to Africa, and I'm glad to say that Kenya actually is the regional office for Africa, where we have our country locations in 9 countries. Of course, our headquarters is in India.
You've mentioned about drylands and its effects on climate change. Are we doing enough? We have arid lands not only in Kenya, but in Africa. Are we doing enough as a continent?
I must say that something is taking place, but we are not doing enough. And I'm saying this looking at where we are today. If you talk about the issues of climate change, we are looking at it from where we need to have people that have enough food to eat. But today as a continent, we have nearly 300 million people who are going to bed on an empty stomach. We are talking of being in an environment where the population should be resilient when you face challenges of droughts, when you face challenges of floods. But today, when we face these challenges, we find ourselves almost going back to square one. And because of that, I'm saying that we need to do enough. I must applaud the countries in Africa that they are part of this commitment, where they've made this nationally determined contribution towards the pledges to actually meet the Paris Agreement, which I believe is part of the Africa Climate Week. But we need now to start going beyond the pledges. We need to move from there. And my emphasis is coming from CRISAT, where we are actually working towards making people have sustainable food production, food that is nutritious, but also food that they can actually improve their livelihoods. And because of that, we really need to rally everyone to make sure that, yes, we need to grow the trees. We need to provide all the adaptation and mitigation of these climate measures. But most importantly, let's make sure that people have food. People are nutritiously fed.
Before we take a break, we'll be getting back to engage more. I just want you to tell me in a brief, scientists will be part of this summit. What are the key things you think they'll be discussing in improving environment issues in Kenya?
Science is very critical when it comes to the issues of climate change. As I said, that I think there are 2 core areas. We are talking about adaptation measures and mitigation measures. We need technologies that can be able to respond to this. I just mentioned about the crop varieties. We also need to make sure that we have enough knowledge that can be taken to the farmers. Today we need more people that can reach out to the smallholder farmers. Let's use the digital platforms. I believe that the knowledge that is being generated, we need at this climate summit to have people that will be able to commit what they are going to do in their various countries. We are looking at a number of areas that people have worked towards over the years, but most of them, I think, we have information that is archaic. We need to move to where we are. Today, I think we have these cyclic floods. We have cyclic droughts that are occurring almost every other year. The technologies we had 20 years ago are not going to do that. Science needs to be up to date with these kind of challenges. So I see this really as an opportunity because we are going to have policymakers who are very critical. Technology is one thing, but we need enabling policy environment. I've seen that a lot of private sector are actually positioning themselves, even in this climate summit. We all need to work together towards bringing this climate mitigation, climate adaptation measures. As we said, we need to make sure that we do not have 300 million people going to bed on an empty stomach here in Africa.
You've just said that we need to ensure people have food on their table. And there is this issue of forest cover. I believe it's not only affecting Kenya, but each and every country in Africa is trying to improve its environment in fighting the climate change. What is your take in regards to the forest cover?
Forest cover is very important because, as I said, when we talk about mitigation, we need to be sucking off this carbon, and trees, they do the good job. And I'm glad to hear that people are making these commitments to expand the forest cover. But again, as long as people are going to bed on an empty stomach, they are going to come back and cut the trees. And for Africa, the core is, let's have the nexus between agriculture and environment. Ministries of forests, ministries of agriculture, environment, we need to work together. We need to have the focus that is going to integrate policies for these different environments. When it comes to youth, which is 60% of the African population, we need to draw them in. How do we draw them in? We need to make sure that they see business. There are so many agribusiness opportunities that can be drawn even as we are fighting this climate change. A good example is in CRISAT, where we have established business incubation for the different crops that we have. For example, millets, that you see the opportunity where these millets are taken to where you have value addition, where the youth actually can have a business. You can have cereals that are actually made from millets, becomes an opportunity for the youth. We talk about these crops that we need to have the seeds. Seed businesses for these crops that are neglected for over time. But I'm glad today that even when we talk about these neglected crops like millets, there is now a momentum to take them to where now there is recognition. Even 2023 has been declared as International Year of Millets. And we need to have these kind of efforts mainstreamed in these efforts to combat climate change effects.
As we come to the close, REBBIE, the theme of this year's summit is under driving the green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. Do you think this will be able to address a number of challenges that mainly affects Africa before we get to the global perspective?
Absolutely. I actually like the headlines that are made in this Africa Climate Week. Very good headlines. But as I said, for me, we need to make sure that people walk the talk. We are scientists from CRISAT. Research is part and parcel of what we do. We do delivery. We need to have the partnership across the board. The research institutions, the private sector, the communities, we need all to be together and make sure that we are walking the talk. Most of the commitments that have been made under the various COP I'm afraid that they are too much on pledges. But pledge is just a pledge. Let's walk the talk.
Thank you, REBBIE. REBBIE HARAWA, the director, CRISAT Africa program, telling Africans to walk the talk as they intend to combat the effects of climate change. This as Kenya is set to host the Africa Climate Summit next week, and thousands of delegates will be in Nairobi.